In the previous statement, I forgot to mention that hijab went after, was Jesus biologically created, adopted, whatever. And he says there are only 3 types of procreation. Well, here's the thing about that. That just ain't true. So, let's see. How many types of procreation are there in nature alone? We have mitosis, meiosis, fission, budding, fragmentation, sporadic, formation, propagation, cloning, parthenogenesis, fertilization, hermaphroditism, and sexual reproduction, just to name 13. That is not including any type of mystical reproduction that would exist in the metaphysical realm. So yeah, he just has a lack of imagination. My critique of David Wood, by the way, I've already stated. He just had no energy and he ran out of spunk in the middle of his first speech. Like, he just stopped and he just shut down. He didn't turn back on to the end of the night. That's my complaint against David Wood. So here's where my critique of hijab comes in. He just comes off as too slick and too smug. He is too much of a showman to take anything that he is saying seriously. He comes off as disrespectful and spurious. Hijab is arrogant and a bad example for the future of apologetics. He is a bad example for future Muslim apologists on how to behave in the presence of Christians if you want to win any of them to your point of view.
That's really what you're trying to say to me, David Wood. I know, by the look of your face here, you would probably agree with me. Let's be honest. Look at his face. Everyone, ladies and gentlemen, take a look at his face. Yes. Anyways, I've got a few minutes left. Let me recite some Quran, because I'm done with this guy.
To put it plainly, you cannot use the Quran to refute the Bible, and you cannot use the Bible to refute the Quran. They are 2 mutually exclusive claims to truth. They are completely incompatible. After reading both, I can tell you quite honestly and very simply, they are not compatible with each other. They do not complement each other, and they directly contradict each other. While you can compare and contrast the 2 collections, much like you can compare and contrast the Greek myths of Homer and Hesiod with the Hindu books of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, you cannot use them to correct each other. It simply can't be done. Because if you believe one to be true, then the other one is necessarily false. They are not compatible. They disagree and contradict directly with each other. It would be much like comparing DC and Marvel and then trying to say that because Scott Snyder wrote something in Batman, that it directly contradicts something that Larry Hama wrote in Wolverine. It just makes no sense. They're 2 completely different universes. They have nothing to do with each other. They're not even the same characters. It makes no sense. They are not the same thing. Yes, they are both comic books. Yes, they are both superheroes. But that's it. They are not the same characters. They're not the same universe. They have different rules. They have different ways of understanding things. They have different approaches to writing, to style, to character development. They're just completely different things. Even though, yes, they're both comic books. And yes, they both take place in the United States. You know, they're both published in New York. They're both, written by people who maybe even know each other and are friends with each other and understand each other. And they might even make the same references to the same things, to the same culture. But they're not the same thing. They're not compatible with each other in that way. It's not the same thing. We then get to David Wood's first rebuttal. And here he makes the correct observation that Muslims misunderstand what Christians mean by persons in the Trinity. And I would add that atheists also misunderstand what Christians mean by persons. To put it simply, we do not mean individual, and we do not mean independent, and we do not mean humanoid or anthropomorphic. We just don't. That's not what we mean. I know I'm mispronouncing that, but whatever. What we mean is something more akin to personality or mode or mission. That's what we mean. We're talking about the way that we interact with that mode of transmission. It doesn't exactly mean humanoid individual when we mean person. And to understand these differences, what we are really talking about is from our perspective. We are not trying to divide God into three aspects. We are simply looking at his unity and then trying to figure out the different ways that we interact with God or the higher power or the creator, whatever you want to call it, whatever you want to call him. The way we interact with him is different, and the way that different cultures interact with him is different from each other. So why is that, and how does that work? The way that we came to that answer when looking at the Bible is that we saw that God interacted in three different ways. And those three different ways are the three persons, the three missions of God, as far as we understand it. Then David Wood gives a response here that is lackluster. And that is, he never really gets around to answering Hijab's question of authority. So I will answer that here. What he should have said is that for all Christians, the first authority is Jesus. That is Jesus Christ. The way that we know what Jesus said is the Gospels. So for us in writing, the first authority is the Gospels. After the Gospels, then comes the epistles and the Acts as well. After the epistles, we then get into the Old Testament. And in the Old Testament, we first look to the Torah, and then the prophets, and then any prophecy that's in the Bible from there. After that, most Christians will look to the church fathers, while most Jews will look to the writings of rabbis, that is, the Talmud and the Midrash, and any Kabbalic writings such as the Zohar. And then it goes down to our teachers. For Catholics, that would mean the Pope and the Magisterium. For Protestants, that would mean their preachers and their pastors. Then, after that, then everything else. But our first authority is Jesus Christ, and we know what he says through the Gospels. And then everything else follows from that. That's just how it works for us. And that is what David Wood should have said, and he didn't. And I'm disappointed that he didn't say that, considering that he learned from Catholics and that he engages with Protestants and Muslims all the time. He should have been able to knock that question out of the park, and he just didn't. Then David Wood makes another mistake. And he does this when he's going after the way that the companions of Muhammad treated him. He's trying to equate Muhammad with a false deity or a false prophet. And in doing so, he completely ignores the way that we, even in the modern world, treat celebrities. So while his argument sounds like it had merit, it did not. And now, David Wood, after dropping the ball, will go for a low blow that actually hurts his argument a little bit. But it's understandable given how he's been treated by Hijab the whole night.
6, I said that Allah's spirit is an eternal person who takes the form of a man to carry out tasks. Again, having trouble hearing down there. If there was a response to that, please remind me. 7th, I said that Islam deifies Muhammad. Said, well, Muhammad spitting and stuff doesn't, what's that got to do with him being God? That's not the point. The point was, Muhammad's just a man, Muhammad's just a man, Muhammad's just a man. And then you see how his followers acted towards him, and it's clear he was much more than a man to him. When a normal human being is walking down the street and spits, you don't say, ooh, I have to rub this all over my body. Muhammad's companions did. If a hair falls off a normal human being's head, you don't say, ooh, I need to grab this, I need to save this. If someone is bleeding, a normal human being is bleeding, you don't say, hey, let me get that running blood and drink it. This was acceptable behavior from Muhammad and his followers. And how, if you saw anyone doing this, If I said, hey, there's this place somewhere in South America or something, and they've got this guy down there, and whenever he spits, they rub it on their faces. Whenever he washes himself, they collect the water so they can rub it on themselves. Whenever he bleeds, he gets cut, they drink it. You say, look at this idolatry, look at this paganism. But that's exactly how Muhammad expected his followers to act. And for some reason, whenever it's in Islam, it's still just pure monotheism.
But there was no reason for that. The audience was already antagonistic against David Wood. There was no reason for him to go that route. And like I said a little bit earlier, it just shows that he willfully ignores how we treat celebrities, even nowadays. So, I'm sorry, man. Like, the gladiators had this kind of thing happen to them, where people would collect their sweat and people would collect their hair clippings. I mean, there's people who collect the clothing of dead celebrities now and collect any hair of dead celebrities now and sell it on eBay or other places for millions of dollars. This was a poor attempt and not worthy of your usual quality of debating. At 1 hour, 12 minutes, and 27 seconds in, hijab is simply wrong. And he is incorrect in his assumptions about Christianity. Let's check this out.
About the Trinity in this verse. Where does it say this is the Trinity and then describe it? The verses that describe the Trinity, for example, chapter 4, verse 171 of the Quran, other places of the Quran, like chapter 5 where the brother was reading, it never tells you what the Trinity is, which is why, for example, many scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah and Jawab Sahih, many scholars actually did say that the Trinity was Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. But some scholars differed with them in exegesis. It doesn't matter.
To answer hijab's question, yes, the Trinity was recognized as a Christian concept before it was dogmatically defined by the Catholic Church at Constantinople. After the Persian Zoroastrian influence and after the Second Temple period, Jews fought against these types of what they considered heresies, as can be read about in Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7, also in Genesis before the beginning of the Noah narrative, especially in chapters 1 through 3. Most respected academic scholars agree that there was pluralism in the Semitic practices, even up to and including the Israeli Jewish periods. As for that reason, the high places were destroyed to combat those kinds of beliefs, as can be read about in 2 Kings chapter 18, verse 4. Again, this also appears in the Jewish pseudo-pagographia, such as in the Book of Jubilees and in some of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Even the Talmud mentions these beliefs as heretical, meaning that they did exist and enough Jewish people believed them that the priests and later the rabbis at the time felt it necessary to write against them. Even some forms of Kabbalah are prone to this way of understanding the nature of God, viewing a Godhead manifested in a unity. At this point in the debate, hijab's anger gets the better of him, and he loses his thread of argumentation.
Pagan sources, he didn't give any. Now, realize, ladies and gentlemen, this man put Christianity under the bus. He threw Christianity under the bus today. I asked him 4 questions. None of those questions were answered. Where is the Trinity in 300 years? If it is a basic, natural inference of the Old Testament, how could you have 4,000 years of Hebrew history? No one has inferred it.
Okay. As you can see, his anger gets the better of him and he's just all bluster. And I've already answered that question. They were mentioned. And here I ask, so what? This is 1 hour, 15 minutes in and 40 seconds.
How dare you? How dare you? What is this? Seriously. And the reason why, once again, I apologize to all the other Christians here. Why? This man has made mockumentaries against Islam. He's attacked Muslims, aggravated Muslims. We know his story. He's not any regular Christian, ladies and gentlemen. The Quran says, "Laysu sawa'a." The Christians are not all the same. If it was James White, I would have shown him the utmost respect. If it was William Lane Craig, I would have shown him the utmost respect. If it was any of those guys, I would have shown them the utmost respect. But this man, no.
Okay. so what? Most apologists here need to do a better job of arguing for the facts. Instead, hijab takes his disgust too far and just makes a fool of himself. This is pathetic. It's pathetic on David Wood's part, but it's more pathetic on hijab's part. This is bad debating. But he did bring up something. So, he says that nowhere in 3,000 years does it exist. I give you the pseudepigraphica. Yeah, it's here. That you can find Trinitarian inferences and dualistic inferences. You can also find these inferences in the Zohar, which I happen to have. And in here you can find it on pages 20 and 21. This is obviously a translation and compilation of selections. But in the actual Zohar, you can find it in the Hebrew at chapter 3, verse 7a, in chapter 1, verse 32b, in chapter 2, verse 43b, and in chapter 3, verse 162a. So, what am I talking about? Okay. Similarly, Trinitarian formula. Remember, this is Jewish rabbinic writings. A Trinitarian formula appear occasionally in descriptions of the Sephirot. Gretz, the great Jewish historian who maligned Kabbalah, was shocked to find that the Zohar even contained utterances which seem favorable to Christian dogma of the Trinitarian Godhead. So let's check that out. So from Zohar 3, we have the masters of the Kabbalah of Sephirot intended to unify the name and flee from the Trinity, but they have made it 10. As the Gentiles say, he is 3 and 3 are 1. So certain Kabbalists believe and say that the divinity is 10, Sephirot, and the 10 are 1. Then from Zohar 1, we get 3 emerge from 1. 1 stands in 3, enters between 2. 2 suckle 1. 1 suckles many sides. Thus all is 1. And then, speaking on the Shema, we get the unification recited every day is the unification of the verse in the Bible. Hear, O Israel, the name of God, our God, the name of God, is 1. They are all 1. Therefore, he is called 1. But there are 3 names. How are they 1? Even though we say 1, how are they 1? Through the vision of the Holy Spirit it is known. In the vision of the eye that is closed, these 3 are revealed as 1. The name of God, our God, the name of God are 1. 3 colors, and they are 1. This is Jewish rabbinic writing. I have the Shema right here. Listen, O Israel, is our God. The Lord is 1. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. These words which I command you today shall be on your heart. Teach them repeatedly to your children, speaking of them when you sit at home and when you travel on the way, when you lie down and when you rise. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be an emblem between your eyes. Write them on the doorpost of your house and the gates. In the Shema, there's a very interesting thing, which is that you have to say things 3 times in a row. For instance, may the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you and grant you peace. And you say it 3 times. So you're saying 3 things 3 times. First time that I ever read the Shema, and the first time I looked through the Seder, that it hit me very hard. I was like, wow, like that's Trinitarian. How can that be there? Because these guys are not Trinitarian, and yet it's there, it's implied. Through Christian or Catholic eyes, you can see a Trinitarian formula there. Also, there are more books in the Bible than what he's saying. Okay, so this one has, I think, 79 books. So in the Orthodox Catholic Bible, the Orthodox Bible, the Eastern Orthodox Bible, 79 books, you can see in the Old Testament, toward the end, in the part that Protestants like to call the Apocrypha, the Deuterocanonical books, you can see the beginnings of a Trinitarian dualistic formula. And it is throughout the Old Testament as well, if you know what you're looking for, if you're looking through the eyes of the New Testament. I should add that three are one. Now, this is seen through the perception of faith, and this is not knowable through reason alone. So salvation history is a record of progressive revelation and the development of terminology throughout time after the completion and canonization of the recognized Bible. Also, the statement co-equal and co-eternal is not a contradiction. All right, so now we're going to get into the cross-examination. So here I will be playing the question, and then I will answer the question instead of going with their answer.
But what about the Holy Spirit? Why does the Holy Spirit not know when the hour is?
Because the right hand should not know what the left hand is doing. That's why. And that's from the Bible, by the way. Next question.
Believed. Give me one primary source of any Jew that believed in the Trinity.
There's a whole heresy in Judaism that was spoken out against before the time of Jesus. This is during the time of the Maccabees. Believed in a dualistic and Trinitarian formula, which I hinted at from the Kabbalah that I just read. So yes, you can see these formalizations inside the Bible and even inside the Jewish study Bibles, including the Art Scroll and the JPS. They talk about how some heretical Jews saw dualistic and Trinitarian and even four, whether it be quatarian and even 10 decatarian systems. So yeah, there are most definitely different views on this. It's talked about from Jewish scholars. They admit to this, that there were heresies that saw these formalizations of the nature of God.
That
Next
the
question.
Father is God and Jesus is the Son of God. My question to you is this. How can you assure us today that in the first 300 years of Christian history that there has not been a Greek mythological influence in the formulation of the Trinity?
That's actually a good question. And here's the honest truth. Greek philosophy did influence the writing and interpretation of not only the New Testament, but the Old. When the Old Testament was compiled in Alexandria, it was done during the Hellenistic period, when all of the Mediterranean was influenced by Greece. When the New Testament was compiled, it was written in Greek and written in places that spoke Greek, Koine Greek to be exact. So yes, words like the Logos come from Greek, not from Jewish thought. While Jewish thought and philosophy does pervade and emanate from the Bible. Greek thought is in there. But that's not a bad thing. Because as believers in progressive revelation, and as a Catholic who believes that God can speak from anywhere and inspire anyone, and that there are elements of truth in reality, and that the more truth there is, the more God is present, that therefore other ways of gaining knowledge, such as reason and philosophy, can aid in understanding religion and in understanding God. Greek thought helped mankind develop, that is, evolve in their understanding of God through inspiration. Also, Hijab's tactic here is either a misunderstanding or a purposeful misdirection, as the church fathers did disagree with each other on many things. just as the original apostles disagreed with each other on both minor and important issues. It is where the majority of them agree that we find consensus. And that consensus is where we get our dogma. This will be continued and concluded in part 3. This is Ramon. The channel is Alpha 4. Please like, please subscribe, please comment down below. And if you want comic book reviews, please check out my other channel, Alpha Centurion 4.